Ladies and gentlemen, welcome one more time to Christian Rademacher teaching about cameras and photography. We're putting confidence into your hands when using these machines, DSLR. It's different than an iPhone. It's different than your eye. It's different than anything that you've ever used before because there's so much about it. Today, we're looking at the third component in the exposure triangle. It's called ISO. We're going to jump right into it. ISO is that last button there at the top right. You'll see very blatantly it says ISO. This one is pretty straightforward. I know the other videos there's some confusing stuff as far as fractions and inverse relations and all that stuff, but ISO, the larger the number, the brighter it is. The lower the number, the darker it is. Pretty simple. I'll show you kind of what that looks like. So when we're in the ISO menu, what we're going to do is we're going to select it with our camera. And you can see we have all these options, but really we want to stick within the 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, the squares of 100. So in ISO, we're going to take our dial, we're going to move it over to 400 or 200 or 100. All right, we're starting at 100, which means we're going to have the darkest photo possible. So when we take a photo at ISO 100, not only are we getting the darkest photo, but we're getting the best quality inside of our image. That means the less ISO, the smaller the number on the ISO, the better quality we have on our image. This also leads us to believe that the higher ISO, the less quality we have on the image. So if we scroll all the way up to 32,000, let's go all the way to 64,000, 6,400. 6,400, that's going to be the least quality that we get. It's going to be pretty grainy if we were to look at this photo when it's all blown up or when it's on the computer. It's going to have a lot of detail inside of it, and you don't necessarily always want that. You want smooth in your photos, especially for facial images. Now, what do I mean by grain? Well, back in the day when you had film, this is a perfect opportunity to show you one of my beautiful cameras. So this is a Canon ET, and it's a film camera, one of my grandpa's cameras. So my mom had this camera. She almost gave it to the thrift store, and I would have done something very vigorous to her hair if she had. But it's a beautiful camera. So in order to open it up, let's pretend I know how to open it up. You know, I get this every time. Every time I go to open this film camera, I have no idea how to do it. Hey, figured out the button. So inside here, it's a film slot. And you can see that the film would go right in here. And as you would advance the camera, the film would spin and it would run through. So what ISO means is the kind of film that you put in here determines the quality of that image that you're taking pictures on. In this case, we have a DSLR, not a film camera, which means we can change the digital film anytime we want. An ISO film of 6,400 would produce brighter image and much more grainy, less quality photos. And an ISO of 200, 400 would produce darker but high quality images or film. And that's basically where this principle comes from. Bigger the number, the brighter it is, the more sensitive your film is. You put something on there and it kind of would shock the film. It'd be like, bzzz, like the first thing you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh gosh, man, so please take that light away. Give me the coffee and tea. But if you've already woken up, your ISO is down to 100 or so. You know, you're just fully going throughout the day. These bright lights don't necessarily shock you. And that's kind of what you can picture the film as, however you want to think of it. But you want to be shooting somewhere, just as a beginner, if I can say this, around ISO 400. We're changing from the camera telling us what it wants to see, in which case you would almost never deal with ISO because it would always read ISO auto. And we're going to, this is what we are telling the camera we want it to see. This gives us confidence and it gives us control over what images we're putting into our camera. So really quickly as a demonstration here, we're going to go into the camera again. We're starting our image at ISO 6400. We've kept the two same settings that we had from our last two videos. So feel free to take a look at those videos if you need refreshers on what shutter speed and aperture are. In this case, we're looking at ISO right over here. If I want to adjust my ISO, what I'm going to do is turn that down. Come on, I'm going to turn that down to 100. and you can see that as I go lower, the ISO gets darker. We've achieved a very dark photo because we've lowered the ISO, but at the same time, we have a much more quality image. I'm going to bring that ISO back up just for you, show you what that looks like when we increase the ISO. You can see the picture is getting brighter the higher the ISO goes, and consequently we now have less quality inside of our image because we've made the camera more sensitive to the light. Without diving into further extrapolations on how this exposure triangle works, there are ways to get a brighter image as well as have a good quality ISO. And I'll let you take a moment to kind of figure that out. If you're piecing these 3 videos together, you're probably getting a good idea on where we're headed as we go on this journey together. I hope that kind of makes sense as far as how the ISO works in your camera. It's pretty straightforward. It's one of the easiest ones. It's one of the settings you're touching the least of, kind of like your face in 2020. One of my favorite things about being able to use the camera this way is the ability to tell a story. So the camera is, I like to say, the tool that you get to use to communicate your story. I hope that makes sense to you. Let me know if you have any cool cameras from ancient of days, back in the day. Film cameras, they're cool. I like them. They have quality, character. And I want to see, hey, what are some of the things that you enjoy photographing? Those intrigue me because the way that somebody sees one object can be totally different than how somebody else sees an object. Thanks for watching these videos. We'd love to see you in some future videos as well, and that we get to explore more on the journey of light with our cameras.